Hey, Jeff here, your YouTube reviewer of New England brews. Welcome back to NEBR, New England Beer Reviews. Today I'm going to be reviewing an old ale, which is new again, from the Samuel Adams or Boston Beer Company. This is their reboot of the New Albion Ale. The New Albion Ale was originally brewed in the 1970s, a pioneer in the craft brew movement. And I'd like to direct you to Brew Guru, John Starodomski's page. He did a review on this and gave a nice history about the New Albion Brew Company and how they first came along and its impact on the industry and whatnot. So, I would highly recommend you look at his review of New Albion Ale. But since it is from the Boston Beer Company, which is out of Boston, Massachusetts, at least their administrative headquarters are, I figured I'd try this New Albion Ale, and it's one that, as a craft beer lover, it really helps me go down memory lane. I'd never had this before, but it has a very interesting history, and it reminds me of my own personal history of enjoying craft beers. The first craft beer I ever had was from the Catamount Brewery of Vermont, and this was back in 1986. And I have a few items from that time period. I have a Catamount coaster from the 1980s. I have the only existing bottle in my collection from the old Catamount Brewery is the Catamount Oktoberfest. I really don't remember much about how this tasted. I remember just about everything from Catamount was really good, but and Oktoberfests are a style I really like, so I've forgotten how it tasted, but I kept the bottle for a reason, so I must have liked it at the time. And I also, while going down memory lane, this is brewed by Boston Beer, and I have this old Sam Adams cream stout bottle, probably from the 1990s. It really doesn't look much different now than it did then, but it's just kind of interesting to look at this old bottle. And here's an interesting one from a brewery that was called the Mountain Brew Company, which later became Long Trail Brewery, Bridgewater, New Vermont, and this was a special one-off edition. It was their 1991 Bicentennial Ale in tribute to the state of Vermont's 200th anniversary of statehood. And my pride and joy from my early craft beer days is my glass from the Catamount Brewery, which again no longer exists. And this is the Ethan Allen Ale glass, which also has a date on here that says, it says 1791 to 1991. Another ale that was in recognition of Vermont's bicentennial. But enough of this memory lane talk. I'm going to get right into the beer here and see what it's like, because the topic of today is the New Albion Ale, which first came around in the 1970s. And has been reintroduced to a new family of craft beer lovers like myself. So, I did forget to grab the can opener. So if you excuse me for a second, I will grab a can opener out of my drawer. Of course, Sam Adams, which is appropriate for this one. So, let's get right into it. I've talked enough. Let's get right into this. I rarely use this glass, even though it is a favorite glass. Not so much... mainly because I don't want anything to happen to this glass. I want to drop it someday and break it because it is a collector's edition, no longer brewed, no longer made, and I really don't want anything to happen to the glass. But it seemed appropriate for the beer I was reviewing, or the ale I was reviewing today. So, New Albion Ale, the 2013 edition of the 1976 recipe, comes in at a pale yellow color with a big, fluffy, foamy head. Now, you got to think about this. In the 1970s, everything was Bud Miller, Coors. A lot of regional beers were still really popular. You can still get PBR and Old Milwaukee and beers like that, Old Style, Rheingold. There's a bunch of them. Falstaff. There's a bunch of them you can talk about from the 1970s. It used to be pretty commonplace. So, when an independent brewer was attempting to take on the big boys, he came up with a beer that probably looked like what you would get from one of the big boys, and that's why I expect this comes up with a pale yellow look. Of course, the recipe would make it this way, the types of malts that they use and hops and whatnot, but pale yellow, golden yellow almost, with a white head. Let's get right into the aroma. Oh my goodness. This has a nice full aroma of grains, maybe a little grass, barley grains, barley malts, a sort of slight hop sensation, balancing the whole thing off. Kind of an earthy hop sensation. But barley grains, I mean, again, it smells a lot like the kind of beer that was pretty commonplace in the 1970s. Let's check out the taste. Ooh. I mean, yeah. You know, this must have really amazed some people who were first getting into the craft brew fandom, I guess you might say, getting into craft brews in those days. I mean, we're getting a body that's light to medium, really smooth and creamy body too. I mean, no astringency, no acidity, really smooth and creamy, really, quite frankly. The taste is upfront pale malts or pale barley malts, a decent sweetness, biscuit, bread, toasted biscuit and bread maybe, and a decent sweetness at first, but then there's a slight bite at the end. I mean, it's not a powerful, heavy-duty bitterness. It's a subtle bitterness, but it does linger a bit and ends slightly, bitter at the end. It's just kind of lingering over the back of my throat. But, you know, when you think about the other beers you could buy in the 1970s, and then you're drinking this one, it really tastes like a higher quality version of the American pale ales that were predominant, were basically 90% of the market back in those days. I mean, yeah, you had a few stouts around, you had a few, I mean, there were a few darker, bitter type ales mainly available from Europe. I mean, IPAs were hardly found regularly in those days. Stouts, you know, as I said, there were some stouts. There were probably the big names like Guinness and people like that. So really, when you're comparing it to what was available in those days, this is far and above better than what was available in those days. And I turned 18 a couple of years after this beer was first introduced, but so I was able to start drinking beer in the late 1970s. Now giving away my age to a degree, but still, I never had a chance to try this until this year, when it became available again, thanks to Boston Beer Company and Samuel Adams. But this is the kind of beer that, I mean, if you're someone who drinks a lot of American pale lagers and pale ales, this is the type of beer you might want to drink to sort of, introduce yourself to the world. You know, kind of follow the historical pattern of the history of beer, of craft beer, starting at the beginning. One of the earliest, crafts. I mean, yeah, there was Anchorstein was around. There were a few others around, but New Albion Brewing Company really sort of was the pioneer. And it's nice that Sam Adams has found the recipe, worked out a deal to brew the recipe and made it available again. Not sure how long it's going to be available. I don't know if it's a one-off thing or going to be available for a long period of time, or come back once a year or whatever, but it'd be nice if they made it available on a regular basis, because this is a beer I could easily drink on a regular basis. So anyway, I think I've spoken enough. This is a nice long video, but I had a lot to say because I really enjoy the craft industry and some of the history involving the craft industry. And so that's it for the Boston Beer Company, the New Albion Ale. Thanks for stopping by. I'll catch you again next time.